Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got Craig with me today. And we're going to be talking through where we think AI is really, truly going to take root first. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody a real quick introduction?
Sure, Emma. My name is Craig Calder. I am the Director of Product and Applied AI at Eberl, and I have been really digging deeply into AI and machine learning technologies for the last year and a half or so, and feel like I have a pretty good handle on what's going on, and have even had some experience here at Eberl applying that knowledge to actual use cases. So I'm excited to be here today. Thanks.
You always know somebody who actually knows a thing or two about AI when they don't necessarily refer to themselves as an expert, but they say they've been like learning about it or digging into it, because there's a lot of, I would say, like couch experts on AI, and the people that truly know a thing or two about it know that there's a lot to know.
Indeed. It is, in fact, that part of the reason I was inspired to come and speak to you is that there's a lot of people talking about what's possible, and I don't think there are as many people actually doing.
Yeah, actually doing the things. So, as I teased before we got going with the introductions, I want to talk about like maybe where you think we're going to see artificial intelligence within the insurance industry really start to take root first and foremost, and like kind of who's going to pave the way and what is that going to look like?
Yeah, I think that that's a fantastic question, and it's pretty complicated because AI, at least what most of us are talking about today, relates to a lot of what we've experienced in the large language models, the OpenAI, ChatGPT world. But AI has been around for quite a while in the insurance industry. And so I just wanted to just distinguish between those two pieces. On one hand, we have what we'll call the existing AI efforts that a lot of insurance companies have invested a lot into. And that's typically more described as deterministic AI, which relates to machine learning. And so what they do is they take large data sets, they analyze that data, build models, and then use that to do predictions on what might happen in the future. And those are the kinds of things that we've all experienced over the last couple of years. Take, for example, if you were going through an insurance online experience and you're wanting to apply for insurance, as you enter information in, at some point it may say you're well qualified or you're maybe not, or they would maybe redirect you in a different direction. The way they determine that qualification is likely based on a machine learning model. So that sort of AI has been going on for quite a while. It has its own challenges. A big part of the challenge has to do with the fact that typically you've needed a team of data scientists to really be able to crack that nut and figure out how to make a predictive model work. Some of those things have been changing, and we can talk about that more a little bit later. But at a high level, there is machine learning, and it's a version of AI you could think of. But I think that the thing that people are most excited about nowadays is the so-called non-deterministic AI work, which, and by non-deterministic, what I mean is if you've ever used ChatGPT and you type in some information, it will give you different results depending on how you phrase the question or what persona you indicate you are. So it really doesn't have the outcome can vary depending on how you query it and what information you include in that prompt. And that is like a really exciting direction, because AI can help us with a lot of problems that are actually kind of gnarly to deal with in computer programming. And a lot of that is what's limiting growth in a lot of insurance companies, because you get a lot of messy data and AI can help us process that messy data. So I really do see, I've been focusing more on the large language model side of things, but there is a lot of work going on in a variety of areas in AI.
So who, like on the grand scheme of things, it feels like maybe larger carriers are going to be who we see kind of paving the way. But what kind of advice do you have for those smaller organizations that might be looking to do more but don't know where to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think that a lot of the larger organizations are going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage because they're so established with their data science teams that I do think that smaller, more nimble organizations will really have the opportunity to get ahead here. And that is a lot driven by the fact that if you can figure out how to apply these new technologies to your processes, for example, you take inbound claims and you can use large language models to convert those into interesting outputs, which can then accelerate your ability to take an inbound claim and get it into your system and subsequently process it. In a way, I think that that would give you an advantage over these big incumbents who I think they're kind of likely going to get in their own way because they've got these established data science teams, and I don't think that they will be as keen to try to adopt these new models, whereas smaller companies can use AI in different ways. And let me just kind of give a couple of examples to help give a little bit more shape to that. So for example, if you want to expand your capacity to provide quality customer support, having a large language model trained in your Q&A, it can actually do a very effective job at answering basic questions for your policyholders. So that's a very simple, and I think there's a lot of companies looking to this type of solution to help them expand their capacity to provide customer care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through these kind of questions. So that's one example. But there's also a lot of more interesting ones up front where you can get your claims into your system faster and have less manual input time. So in my opinion, I think smaller companies will have an advantage there. Now, before I go into that, let me just pause there and see if you have any clarification.
Well, I want to really dive into more of these use cases because I think going back to like what we were talking about right after your introduction, there's a lot of people that are talking about like, what is the possibilities or like the potential, but not necessarily fully diving into specific use cases. So I want to keep you on that train before I let you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go and like take an example of, we often experience in the insurance industry, we tend to transfer data around that's kind of messy. Imagine you're sending some claim data with a bunch of attachments in an email, and that particular use case is very common in our industry. We have a lot of data transferring around in sort of inconvenient formats. So let's take that use case, for example, a large language model, and you can do this on your own and experiment with it in ChatGPT 4, for example. You can go and take a couple of your attachments along with the email body. You can send it into ChatGPT and tell it, I'd like you to output in structured format a bunch of fields that are relevant. So imagine that you've taken this awkward and difficult to deal with email and you just had it automatically processed by ChatGPT. And now you have an output where it'd be easily formatted, and you could take this to another level, which is even have it outputted in JSON format or something that a computer can consume. But even at the least, you could use available tools today, pass this data in, and now tell it, give it some example, like here's an example of what I want the output to look like, and format it in this way. And then you would immediately be able to copy and paste that into whatever system you're putting that into. And that is going to reduce the time that you as a small provider might be able to immediately take advantage of. So, that's a good example of something that could be easily done today that wasn't even possible a year ago. Like really the capabilities are spectacular in this area. So that's one of the ones that I think is very valuable. There are some that are more complex, like the machine learning stuff that would require a bit more investment of time and research to be effective at, that we could also explore if you want me to go into more detail there.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, machine learning, that's something that has typically been the purview of the large providers who could afford to go and have data scientists on board. But those days are passing. And so my suggestion, if you're interested in exploring machine learning, which is basically you're training these models in mechanisms so that they can recognize inbound data and then predict outcomes, is if you're a Microsoft Azure user, they have a bunch of tools within their Azure data set where you can actually set up your own machine learning tools. You can feed in data, build models, and implement them within your systems. So if you were interested in pursuing that, and this may not apply to all organizations. Like if you're using a Guidewire or some other tool like that, you may not have access to the internal data. But if you do have access to the data, what you can do is you can take this data, process it, build a model, and then have it utilized in your system. So you may have an inbound claim. You could go and evaluate its complexity and potentially route it differently depending on what you want to do. So if you're going to go down that path, my first piece of advice was there's an incredible amount of online content available today. And this wasn't really possible even a year and a half ago. So you can either do YouTube, Coursera, or whatever course you want, but at least become familiarized with these technologies that you're intending to use. And once you've done that, the next step is to get yourself organized around how is your data. You have to understand how your data is flowing through your system, because it's that data that you'll be using in your machine learning models. And so it typically requires a bit of a collaboration within your organization. So you need somebody who understands the business side of things, like what is this data that we're going to analyze? And then you need someone perhaps from your technology organization to help implement it into your systems, so that what you end up with is a cohesive thing that is providing value to your business, because what it's doing is it's helping accelerate the claim flow process through your organization.
Thank you so much for joining me for the conversation and offering some legitimate places for people to start. For anybody that's not, make sure that you make your way to LinkedIn and check out Craig, get connected with him, as well as Eberl, and certainly reach out to either one of us if you've got any questions. But thank you so much for your time today, and thank you everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.